Oh, and they're also on our website. At least they're on my website. So.
Good morning, all, and thank you for joining us. We're just going to wait another minute or so because we have several more people who are signing in. So thank you for your patience, and we'll get going in a moment. So why don't we get going on this chilly Saturday morning? Good morning to everyone, and welcome to our issue forum hosted by our local legislators, Senator Joann Ginal, Representative Cathy Kipp, Representative Andrew Boesenecker, Representative Mary Young, and unfortunately, Representative Judy Amabile is not able to join us this morning due to a conflict. Today's topic is affordable housing, and we are honored to have three excellent presenters. Sue Beck-Furcus, who is the Social Policy and Housing Program Manager for the City of Fort Collins, Kristen Candela, the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity, and Kelly Evans, Executive Director for Neighbor to Neighbor. My name is Beth Jager, and I will be your moderator for the next 60 minutes. And after a brief welcome by our local legislators, we will have presentations by Sue, Kristen, and Kelly. We will then open the session to your questions about today's topic, and you'll be able to ask those questions in one of two ways. You may either use the chat function at the bottom of your screen and type in your question, or if you prefer to ask your question live, then go to the reaction button, click on that, and embedded in there, you will see a raised hand function. Click on that. I will see your virtual hand and call on you. Please remember to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And then after your question is answered, please remember to go back on mute so we can minimize background noise. Finally, one last request, please ask your questions and offer your comments in a respectful manner so we can set a very positive tone for this morning's discussion. So with that, let's begin with brief remarks from our elected officials. And Senator Ginal, do you want to begin?
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to everyone who's joined on this morning. Appreciate the involvement for this really important discussion and presentations from our housing experts. Affordable housing is one of the top issues that we're looking at across the state, as well as I think everywhere in this country. But looking forward to hearing that. And just one thing before I turn it over to my colleagues is let's all say a prayer and keep in our hearts the Ukrainian people.
Thank you. Representative Boesenecker.
Well, good morning, everybody. And I couldn't have said it better than Senator Ginal. Certainly our hearts go out to folks across the globe who are continuing to feel the impacts of war and violence. And certainly that's at the top of, I think, a lot of minds this morning. I want to say thanks to Beth and Vicki for moderating this outstanding panel. And of course, our panelists, Sue, Kristen, and Kelly, for joining us this morning. I can't say enough good things about these folks and the way that we rely on them at the state legislature to find solutions for folks in our community. So I'm grateful for their expertise and certainly looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Young.
Thank you all for participating, especially thank you to Beth and Vicki for hosting us. And I'm looking forward so much to Sue, Kristen, and Kelly's presentation. I'm excited to be working on a bill to spend some of the American Rescue Plan Act money to address the issues of homelessness in the state. And this certainly intersects with the issues of access to affordable housing. And I also share my fellow legislators' concerns about the issues across the globe, especially in Ukraine, around war, and definitely my heart is with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kipp?
Yeah, thank you so much for turning out this morning, everybody. We really appreciate it. Thanks to Beth and Vicki and for hosting and for our excellent panelists. So affordable housing is something that really has reached crisis levels in Colorado. It's one of the major issues that we have as a legislature looked at over the interim, and we had an affordable housing task force, which is looking at this issue in terms of how to best leverage one-time funding that we've received from the federal government to try and make transformational change in a few areas. And this is one of those areas because we know it's so important. I know several of us have bills in that space that we're bringing forward this session. But it's an incredibly important issue. And I'm just really excited to have Sue and then Kristen and Kelly, I think I'm getting the order of the speakers right, to speak to us this morning. So with that, we mostly want to hear from them. So I'm going to hand it over to Sue. And if you guys have questions in the chat, either address them to co-hosts and hosts or just directly to Beth in your chat. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you all.
So Sue, do you want to begin?
Thank you. And thank you, Kelly, for getting our slides together. So my name is Sue Beck-Firkus. I work for the city of Fort Collins, and I am so happy to be with all of you this morning to talk about my favorite subject, affordable housing policy. So I see some of the faces I recognize, and I think there are some new people in the audience. So I really appreciate everybody being interested in this topic. And I couldn't have planted better kickoff comments from our wonderful legislators today, because what we're going to do next is talk about policy from the federal all the way down to local government and how we're working together. So Kelly's going to run my slides for me, and she's a wonderful colleague from Neighbor to Neighbor. You're going to hear from later. And also Kristen Candela is going to help us out this morning. So we're really going to have a great range of topics for you to dig into. Okay, next slide, Kelly. So I think everybody really in the United States knows that housing is becoming a crisis. People cannot afford to live where they wish to. And that's pretty much true across the entire country. And that's certainly true in Colorado. People are really feeling pinched. And that's true in Fort Collins as well. But what's really wonderful is that we're at this amazing time in history where policy is really lining up, aligning, and feeding to each other. I really have to thank our representatives at the state level. It has been so helpful to get clear policy advice, and the feds too, because really the work of implementing all that policy happens at the local level. But we have gotten clear and direct policy, especially from the state, like for instance, around renters' rights and around mobile home park regulations. And so that's really helping direct activities at the local level. Next, Kelly. When we talk about the housing spectrum, I often use this slide. A lot of you in the audience probably are sick of this slide, but I think it does a good job of telling us where we've been and where we're going. So it used to be that affordable housing was the only place that policy and programs were required to give people choices. And typically that's to about 80% area median income, around $80,000, $75,000 to $80,000 in our community. And the market took care of everybody else, but that's not necessarily true anymore. We're seeing a lot of stress in the middle income earners, categories related to housing, and the stress is just creeping up the housing spectrum and the income spectrum. So now we have a new affordable housing plan. No, I'm sorry, it's a housing strategic plan at the city that deals with all of housing, not just those affordable ranges. So what I thought I would do is talk about that transformational task force that that Representative Kipp mentioned. Kelly, did you skip a slide? No? Okay, sorry. And what's really interesting is that this year, we just passed our housing strategic plan in, yeah, we're good. We just passed it in 21, and we talked about challenges, we talked about a vision, and then we talked about ways to implement that vision. And that's really what the state task force did as well. So we have a lot of the same challenges identified, and we're again aligned, I believe, and moving in the right direction. So really quickly, looking at what the state task force stated as challenges, we're still attracting people, but we are losing affordable housing to house those people. This is affecting everybody, not just low wage earners anymore. And that's causing housing insecurity, which can lead to homelessness. We know housing prices have really escalated, and it's much harder for our middle class to comfortably afford housing. At the state level, we need a lot of housing, 225,000 units for the current residents, and we need about 100,000 more for the residents that we know will be coming. And we have not been building very much housing since 2010. It's starting to gear up again, but we just haven't reached pre-recession levels of construction. So we need transformational change in our housing policy, and we want to do it in an equitable way. Next, Kelly. So those were the state's challenges. Here are the city's challenges that are incorporated into our plan. Price escalations affecting everybody, but disproportionately our Black, Indigenous, people of color neighbors. There aren't enough places for people to rent, and what's there may not be what they want. The city does have some tools and resources, but not enough. Housing is expensive to build, and it's only going to get worse. And then what about COVID? We passed this over a year ago, and who would have guessed that we're still seeing the effects of COVID? And lastly, housing policy really hasn't been looking at housing stability, especially for people who rent. And here in Fort Collins, we have about half of our population renting now. So we really need to think about their needs. Now we're back to the state, okay? This is the state's vision. It's a new future with a housing system that's affordable, that takes care of our existing stock, that is equitable, that deals with homelessness quickly, that allows people to build wealth, is sustainable, has services integrated, and removes obstacles, which can be local regulations. Next slide. The state said they need between 400 million and 568 million to attack this problem. And these are some of the ways they want to do it, with new resources, including revolving funds, using grants to partners that are on the ground working, dealing with the issues that are happening in mobile home parks, and helping them to become really wonderful places to live, even better than they are now. Land banking, which is near and dear to my heart, since I'm the manager of the land bank program at the City of Fort Collins, permanent supportive housing, integrated housing incentives, and talking about solutions that go beyond 80% area median income. Now here is the city. I hope you're not getting seasick. I'm back and forth between the state and the city, but I think that they are really comparable. And I was excited when I saw how they align. So our vision is in the city is that everyone has healthy, stable housing they can afford. And we have guiding principles that really are going to help us make sure that we keep that vision in mind. We want to be agile and opportunistic for all of those opportunities that are coming from the feds and the state. We want to build on our existing plans and policies. We have a proclivity for planning in Fort Collins. We started our first affordable housing plan in 1999, and we've been really focused since then. And we have made progress, but we have not solved the problem. Nobody has. But we're going to keep looking at it, and we're going to reassess every 2 years to make sure that we don't lose sight of that vision and the ways to get there. Next. So our housing strategic plan has 26 strategies, but they boil down to 6 key outcomes. And basically, we just want to increase the supply and affordability of housing. We want to give people choice. We want to help people maintain stability. We want to improve housing equity. That's such an important theme for the work that will be going forward from here on. We want to preserve our existing affordable housing, and we need to increase accessibility as our population ages and just to accommodate those people with needs. Next slide. We gave ourselves 2 years before we check in again to see how we're doing. And so we categorized our 26 strategies into quicker wins, which some of which we've already accomplished, transitional strategies, and transformational strategies. Again, just to give ourselves accountability. What are we trying to do and how are we doing it? Next slide. In our 2015 Affordable Housing Plan, we set a goal to have 10% of all of our housing affordable around build out at the end of our planning horizon, which we look at it at about 2040. And so we have, again, metrics to guide whether what we're doing is being effective. We've built about 120 affordable units per year over the last 5 years, which is great. But in order to accomplish our goals, we need to more than double that moving forward. Next slide. And so we also looked at what kind of revenue is going to be required to help us meet those goals. We already have about 2 to 3 million a year that comes through the federal competitive process and city funds. We also have an affordable housing capital fund for the next 5 years that adds a little money, but we need to look at where else can we find funding. ARPA, the American Rescue Program Act, is a great opportunity, and we're going to talk, I think my friends are going to talk more about that as we go forward. Usually we subsidize housing, not quite yet, Kelly, sorry. We subsidize housing about $39,000 a unit, and that leverages many, many sources because it costs $300 or more to build a unit of affordable housing anymore. So what we figure we need, in contrast to the to the state projections, we think we need about 10 to 12 million a year. We have that 2 to 3. And so we're looking to find 8 to 9 more. For the next couple of years, we will have extra resources, and we really want to leverage them and make them last and build a future for tomorrow. So next slide. There are ways that you can help us get involved. Right now, we have a rental housing advisory group forming at the city. We're going to look at occupancy, at rental registration, and at small landlord incentives. So they're really looking for people to join this group. You can apply until, I guess tomorrow. The end of day tomorrow is when applications are due for that, but we're looking for people who have an interest in rental housing. Next slide. And then we have a newsletter. I don't know if everybody knows that. It's fcgov.com/housing. That's where you can sign up for an application for that rental group. And that's where we really push out current information about what's going on at the city. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, and I'm going to stick around for your awesome questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to everyone attending today. We certainly feel grateful for everyone who joined today, to our legislators and to our wonderful partners at the city and across the housing spectrum, with Kelly here as well. I am here speaking on behalf of Habitat for Humanity in Fort Collins, and I too will rotate a little bit between boots on the ground in Fort Collins and statewide. So I wanted to share briefly an impact study on Habitat for Humanity statewide. So you probably know this, but Habitat for Humanity, go back for a second, Kelly, is all across the state and all across the country. There are 1,400 affiliates in the United States. So surprisingly, Habitat for Humanity is the largest private home builder in the United States. So we are really the only affordable homeownership left in the state of Colorado. And let's continue on, and I can share why that matters. Homeownership is transformational. And I think it's something we've been thinking a lot about is how do we invest? Where do we invest? And we have seen this, that homeownership actually has important health outcomes. So when we think about health, we especially over the pandemic season, we've thought it's about health care, but data now shows that the built environment where you live is much more responsible for your health outcomes than where you go to receive care in the healthcare system. And so here are some statistics, and I'm not going to read through each of them, but I'll just grab out a few that I think are meaningful. 90% of our homeowners statewide saw an improvement in their family's health since moving into their Habitat home, since getting that stability of homeownership. It impacts financial stability. When each of us think about resilience, I'm sure each of us have a story of, gosh, I think I can grab my kids' college fund out of my house, or, I have flexibility and mobility because of my home. So we know it produces wealth, but what else does it do? 81% of our homeowners said they felt more financially secure. And I'll illustrate that in just a minute. But I think from the legislator perspective, what was interesting was that more than half of our homeowners reported using less public assistance. So they didn't need all the programs they did previously after stabilizing their home cost and owning their home. So let's continue to the next slide. Habitat homeowners increase their education. They get different jobs. They report better outcomes in terms of their kids' grade because they have a place to study. They're not moving all the time. They're walking to the same school with the same kids, and they know where they're going to be. It changes the workforce. You can see on the top right here, who are Habitat homeowners? It's a question I get as much as any. Who are the people buying Habitat homes? Or are they homeless? No, they're not. And the entire housing spectrum is important. So we're zoning in on homeownership here, but who are Habitat homeowners? They're working in healthcare. They're working in education. We have teachers. They are running offices, transportation, sales and retail. I believe all workers are essential, but they are by definition essential workers. What was interesting out of this impact report is that our homeowners are saying they drive less. And I think as we think about how home is transformational, we also can connect dots to our climate action goals in our community and statewide, that housing is connected. When people live where they work, they're not driving as much, which lowers carbon emissions. Let's continue to the next slide. I wanted to tell a quick story. Representative Kipp, you may recognize Natasha and her daughter Samantha. You got to build with them on site, and this was several years back before they closed on their home. And I want to point this out as a story that illustrates a much bigger picture. So on the right here, you'll all see, this is a hopeful journey. Let's position it that way. It's hopeful. But Natasha moved 13 times in 8 years prior to being able to buy her Habitat home. So during that journey, it's pretty hard to see here. I'll just pull out a couple examples. She lived while pregnant with Samantha in a trailer with no water behind her church. No water. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment where the arrangement to get something affordable was that the maintenance crew could come in and out all day long. She had a roommate arrested. The story goes on, but the connection here is that chasing something affordable doesn't always mean it's going to be safe. And so Natasha closed in February of 2020 on her Habitat home. And what was really amazing to see was the resilience that came from being stable and owning her home. So we talked to her about that. Well, what's happened since then? And it wasn't easy. It was not at all difficult to stay in touch with Natasha because she is now serving on the HOA board. She serves on the HOA board. She changed jobs during the pandemic because she said, I felt like I could. So she improved her job. She's been saving for her daughter's education and for her own retirement in ways she hadn't before. And I bring this up because it's very easy to go, this is a great story of just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I don't think that's what it is at all. You see Natasha's journey, all that energy was going into chasing something affordable before. Once she didn't have to worry about that and that essential foundation was secure, she was able to transform that energy into something else. That's why this matters. There are so many Natashas in our state trying to do the same thing and they just can't get there. Let's move on. Habitat has to scale. You know, homeownership is really, really important, as I've said, and this is our current neighborhood, the Harmony Cottages, where we're building 48 homes. You can see we are using the land efficiently here with these homes being paired homes with common garden areas. They live well, they're beautiful, they encourage community. And you'll see on the top left, what we're most known for here is volunteers. And that's important. Our volunteers are diverse. They represent diverse faith communities and corporate partners, and they represent really all of the community coming together. There'll be maybe 15,000 volunteers that touch this development at any point in time between now and when we build it out. However, it costs about $300,000 to build a Habitat home. And that compares directly with what it costs to build a rental unit. So I think that's very important to know, is that it's almost exactly the same cost to build a rental or a home ownership unit. In order for us to build more, we need more resources. That's obvious. But even 48 homes with hundreds of people living here certainly is a drop in the bucket of the need. And so we want to impact the sector in any way we can. So I'm going to point out this house on the middle left here. That house was built by high school students. I can hear you all gasping, you're all muted, but that house was built by 100 high school students. Pooter Builds is a program at Pooter High School where 100 students a year learn geometry hands-on by doing construction. They actually build the house in the parking lot of the high school, and then it's brought over to the site and finished on location. So over 700 students have gone through this program now. And why I bring this up is that we have had massive challenges with subcontractors, with supply chain. In January, home builds actually across the country were lower. And the stated reason by the Home Builders Association is that people were out. People were actually out with COVID. We had 10 out of 12 HVAC crews unable to be out working. And so we couldn't finish a home because we couldn't get the HVAC crew out. So we've had all these challenges and it's going to get worse. This is actually not about the pandemic. We know about 65% of the trades are going to retire in the next 10 years. So we have to be feeding and creating workforce development opportunities. And so this is a win-win. These Pooter High School students are not necessarily on a 4-year career path through college. They are trying to get, many of them need an alternative route. And that's what this program does. So these Pooter builds, 7 of them are done now. And we're going to keep doing that because we think it's important to the overall picture and to creating access to affordability across the entire sector. Kelly, if you go on. So Sue and Representative Kipp mentioned this unprecedented opportunity. These ARPA funds are a once in a lifetime. They could create generational change. And I want to reference that because it's so important to homeownership. We could fit into these revolving loan funds here, this $150,000, and loans are important. We do need access to low cost capital for sure. We also fit into this nonprofit and local government grant bucket of $150 million. And that is a key to us being able to make these homes affordable, because $300,000 as the built cost is not affordable to our home buyers. So let's go to the next slide. There's a lot of stats here, and Sue's and mine overlap some. So I'm just going to point out that over 61% of the homes for sale in Colorado are over $500,000. And that there's a supply issue. I mean, Sue said it, there has not been enough home building to keep up with the demand, even for the people already living here. It isn't just about the people coming in, it's about people like Natasha, who were already here and are getting kicked out. So for us, that gap to make home available and accessible is $100,000 per unit. That's the difference between what it costs to build and what someone can actually afford to buy. Let's go to the next slide. There's been a historic lack of investment in homeownership. And so these statistics are from a recent report. And you can see that more money is going into rental. That's the bottom line. And it's not either or, it's yes and. We need both desperately, we need both. But it is important to habitat into homeownership because we don't have the same tools to be able to build. We don't have access to the low-income housing tax credit or LIHTC. So while we use every source we can, we have a brewery donating land, we have a church donating land, we have corporate partners, we are bringing people together in as many ways as we can. It is not enough to get us there. And eventually you just can't keep doing it. There's a tipping point. Let's continue to the next slide. So homeownership is the primary means of building wealth for Americans. We all know this. 3 in 4 Colorado homeowners, 3 out of 4 are white, non-Hispanic. The average white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family and 5 times the wealth of the typical Hispanic family. So we need to invest in homeownership to right historical wrongs. If we want to be sitting here saying we took an unprecedented opportunity and created generational change, then we need to use those funds in ways that actually change the system, change the framework. Let's continue to the next slide. This opportunity through ARPA is important. It is definitely yes and. We need to do everything across the spectrum. But what I would like to ask for support in is seeing that $150 million that can go to nonprofit grants include a dedicated piece for homeownership. Let's not leave homeownership out. And we really do need a subsidy of $75,000 per unit to make it possible. That's my ask. And I thank you for allowing me to share today and appreciate your questions. That's it for me.
Thanks, Kristen. So we all know that opportunity and access to stable homes can change lives. So all 3 of us and many of you listening are big proponents of homes for our neighbors and for ourselves and our family members, whatever they may look like. We need stable homes for the obvious fact that home is the foundation for success. This was in the Compass report, which Larimer County produced a long time ago. I think I found this about 10 years ago, but it just does such a nice job of showing the dynamics in a family that are needed for people to live their best lives. And I grabbed this from that report 10 years ago because it really showed all of the pieces of a stable life work together. And it is pointing out here that if housing were to break down, the other dynamics of that household typically, usually, also are negatively impacted. It is very clear from years and years of research and data in our country and likely in the world that if we don't have housing, other areas of our lives are going to suffer considerably. Academics, employment, health and wellness, interpersonal relationships, the whole thing. So to remind us what life was like before the pandemic, we had significant housing equity issues then. And one of the, I guess, benefits of having gone through this pandemic is many of our equity issues were brought to light. So I think it's helpful for folks to know that in America, not everybody who qualifies for subsidized housing gets it. It's not a free-for-all. It's not passed out quickly or easily. In fact, the vast majority of households who qualify don't get it. So 75% of households qualify for subsidized housing and don't receive it. During the pandemic, this is data out of the Denver metro area, again, in that transformational task force report that Kristen and Sue have referenced, the number of first-time homelessness that has been experienced in the last year in the Denver metro increased 40%. This economic downturn in housing instability caused as a result of the pandemic are touching households that were previously not impacted as much by housing instability. Something that in our region it's really important to know is that the average wage needed to actually afford a 2-bedroom apartment is about $26 per hour. So you can think about all of the folks who don't earn that, and educators, clearly our service industry, so much of our workforce is paid under $26 per hour. And this isn't even speaking to wages needed to be able to move into the home ownership market, which clearly has value for generations to come. Like Sue had mentioned, rentals make up about half of our housing market. So we need to be thinking about all types of housing. Home ownership is about half and rentals is about half. For rentals, there are just over 17,000 households in Fort Collins alone who are renting apartments or homes that they cannot afford. So this puts a lot of families at risk when they have unexpected expenses, which we all have unexpected expenses. If you already can't afford where you're living, that unexpected expense is going to impact you, and it is going to be a crisis for you. We aren't speaking a lot to homelessness today, but clearly it is a part of our housing spectrum, unfortunately. There are just under 1,400 students in Poudre School District, just under 800 in Thompson, and 40 in Estes Park who are identified as being homeless. Typically, those families are not seen out on the street. They are doubled up or they are living in their cars. So we have a considerable issue. And thankfully, I think during this pandemic, we've also seen the impact of prevention, which Neighbor to Neighbor had always been providing, but suddenly it feels like, I don't know, people value it because it's very effective. Lots of data here, don't be scared. Okay, don't even read it yet. So I want to set the stage a little bit. That slide is typically pretty interesting, but I want to share with you that one of Neighbor to Neighbor's largest programs is eviction prevention. It was before the pandemic, and it's now our biggest program as an organization. Before the pandemic, Neighbor to Neighbor was providing about $20,000 per month in emergency rental assistance or housing achievement assistance. So about $20,000 per month was our baseline as of March of 2020. I'm going to walk you through what it looks like today. So we are now calling this resident and landlord stimulus because we really are cutting a lot of checks to landlords. It helps the economy when people can pay their bills, both renters and landlords. So what we have here on the top is just the total distribution by just our organization by month on the right, but then these left columns are quarterly, just going back not fully through the full pandemic, but most of it. There are a couple of emergency assistance programs that we are distributing right now. The first is eviction prevention. That is the largest, and that is helping keep families in their homes so that they can get back to work, stay healthy, all the good things. So in January alone, we were just under $2 million out the door for our organization. And of course, that compares to our $20,000 per month we would have seen 2 years ago. Utility assistance has been added to our mix. Makes a lot of sense if you're already cutting assistance checks for rent to go ahead and include utilities. So we have families whose lights and heat and internet aren't getting shut off. And then we also provide move-in assistance because equally important to help people stay in their homes as well as to achieve a stable rental home. And there are a lot of costs, if we can remember when we moved into rental housing, that you have to pay up front, and deposits are often 2 times what the rent amount is. So, and then this breaks down, we're not going to spend a lot of time belaboring this, but what we are distributing by community. And then for a while earlier in the pandemic, we were also serving Weld County. So we had just under $2 million distributed in Weld County, 1.5 for the more rural areas of Larimer County, 6 million to Loveland households, and about 11.5 million in Fort Collins. Most recently, our organization has started providing mortgage assistance, which is also new. If you can see it at the very bottom here, we are one of the 3 organizations in the state piloting this program currently. So we just started in November with 1 household, just under 20 households in December, and now we're ramping up as the program gets going. In January, we served 34 households for a total of 54. So pulling back from data a little bit and get lost in data analysis, the bottom line is stable homes build strong communities. When people have a stable home, they just are able to be their best selves and meet whatever goals they set for themselves. These are some of our youth entrepreneurs with then Senator Kafalis, a little lending library that one of the leadership programs helped create. And this is Neighbor to Neighbor's resident committee, who before the pandemic got to go to California for a leadership conference. And a lot of these are single moms, man, they were super pumped, as I would have been too, to hop on a plane and get to go somewhere and improve their knowledge alone. I've just been fortunate to get to meet Evan because he joined the Neighbor to Neighbor board. Evan was experiencing homelessness before he was able to move into one of our single family homes, and he had no heat. He was living in a camper for 2 years because of his health. He has a seizure disorder, and just speaking again to what Kristen was saying about the impact on health when you have a stable home, the day he moved into a stable home, his seizures stopped, and he has not had one since. He has not had a seizure since. This is 1 year. He went from having monthly seizures to 0 seizures in a year. He's been housed with us now, I think, for closer to 3 years, seizure-free, back to work, has a car. His life has been transformed. Also homeownership. We don't just live in the rental sphere. Neighbor to Neighbor educates homeowners. It's such a confusing process to buy a house, if we can all remember when we have done that. We do that either in person or online, and touched 1,700 households with education last year. Habitat and Neighbor to Neighbor partner on this. We work and educate Habitat homeowners so that they're set up fully for success. And then 1,500 of our folks who were educated successfully purchased homes. This is a statewide statistic because of our online course. About half of those are in the North Front Range. And of those, 33% had low income for their household. So it is still possible. We had a housing counselor who used to say, just because your income is lower or you have credit needs that need to be repaired, it doesn't mean that homeownership is impossible for you. It just means you're gonna maybe have a little bit of a longer on-ramp, but this is not impossible. I think that's a very hopeful statistic that 1/3 are still able to pull it off. We also provide foreclosure with a 90% success rate mitigating loans with banks to keep homeowners as homeowners. Reverse mortgage consultation, and then home share is a matching service we provide to create inventory without having to build anything. So when we have such intense market challenges, it really requires diverse, innovative solutions, such as home share. And this is one of our matches where a senior homeowner opens their home for a renter of any age, and they have companionship. Sometimes they support each other with chores. The renter pays rent, so it is supporting that senior homeowner in being able to age in place. Just an innovative solution without having to build a thing. Habitat's model is is obviously efficient and so critical. Creative use of land, preserving open space by using it well and having density in areas. Occupancy limits should be reviewed. Living wages would help a whole lot. Employers are probably going to need to start looking at offering housing stipends. So there's a variety of approaches. One that isn't listed here is preserving our current stock. We have an amazing group of local landlords who are just offering their apartments as naturally occurring affordable units. So making sure we preserve that inventory. Changing the world is daunting, but helping your neighbor is second nature. We have so many good neighbors in our region. I mean, just the most beautiful people live here. And just this week, we're presented with an acquisition opportunity that I can't really afford right now because I'm getting ready to rehab a whole bunch of my apartments. So of course, you know, the timing of these things happens when you don't have your cash available. And that landlord is saying, maybe there are creative solutions. Maybe we can look at a seller carryback note. They want to sell the property to us and are willing to work with us because they know that we will maintain housing stability for the people who live here. So just a big shout out to all the landlords out there caring for people. And we just really, as the panel of all three of us, want to thank you all very much for your interest. And at this point, I think we're open to questions.
Well, I have to thank you, Sue, Kristen, and Kelly. What amazing work you're doing in the community to really advance the vision of affordable housing for all. Thank you very much. We're going to open it for questions right now, which again, you can write them in using the chat function, or you can use the raise your hand function to ask them live. And we have a question here on the chat from Deb Bobowski. Please ask Kelly and Kristen how they help their lower income home owning folks manage the ongoing cost inflation associated with property tax increases, home insurance increases, major home maintenance issues, especially if their income growth does not keep up with such cost growth. I hope I said that okay.
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you for the question. I think one of the key components of helping our Habitat homeowners manage future costs is to get the mortgage amount correct now. So HUD says that you really should be paying less than 30% of your income on housing. And we have created a mortgage payment based on the exact income of the homeowner. So we include an estimation of HOA dues, property taxes, and the mortgage payment, all under 28% of a person's monthly income. So if those property taxes increase, the HOA dues increase, there's a little bit of insulation there to protect our homeowners and help them remain sustainable in the future.
Thank you. Karen, you have your hand up.
Thank you.
Like to come off mute? Okay. Thank you.
I so appreciate all the work that you folks are doing. It's just amazing. My question is more like kind of more global perhaps, but you know, we've been so affected by rising prices and the wealth gap. And now, you know, the legislature's dealing with private equity firms buying up manufactured home parks, that type of thing. And it's like, I feel like we were all caught off guard about that. And I mean, what's the next kind of evil equity, private equity thing that's going to come down the pike? That is there a way to know ahead of time to head stuff like this off before it happens, kind of? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just so disappointing that we just go from one kind of crisis to another, and with even.
Representative Boesenecker, did you want to respond to that?
And I'm certainly happy to defer to our housing experts on the panel here, but I did want to mention in particular in relation to private equity firms and manufactured housing sales in Colorado. We are indeed seeing an uptick of private equity firms, specifically out-of-state private equity firms and investors buying manufactured housing in Colorado at both an accelerated pace and an increased price tag. I think more than any of us would have anticipated, previously. I am carrying one of the Housing Task Force recommendations in that space with the Protections for Mobile Home Park Residents bill. It will include a $50 million revolving loan fund that will aid residents to sort of bridge that gap that often happens in the instances where they have the opportunity to purchase their parks. And it also includes a right of first refusal for public entities and housing authorities inside of that space to really be able to help residents have an increased toolkit to be able to purchase their homes when they come up for sale. I think those things are helpful, but I can also say I've been in conversation with Cathy about understanding the dynamics here in Colorado, and particularly in the manufactured housing space, and talking through some initial ideas about what would it look like for some of our real estate experts in communities to recognize or at least flag for folks in the housing space when a particular mobile home park or manufactured housing space is vulnerable. And I would use vulnerable to indicate, it looks like there's a potential for sale, or there's other activity on the ground that might indicate that that housing space might soon become available. And last but not least, I'll say this, the $50 million revolving loan fund also includes grant monies that can be pulled down by nonprofits and residents to do that organizing piece in advance. So when a park comes up for sale, residents have really gone through one of the initial hurdles that often prevents them from resident-owned communities in the first place.
Great. Any other comments? Thank you, Karen, for your question.
I'd
Rochelle?
just like to add to that. It's not just the mobile home parks or the homes that we're talking about with Habitat for Humanity. What I'm seeing is that private equity firms are starting to buy up lots of homes in Old Town and just save them and wait on them, sit on them. And this is a concern about, buying existing homes within the city, and how I think, Karen, you had a really good point, is how are we going to, or can we limit that if we can do anything at all?
Thank you, Senator. Rochelle Miller, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you so much. My name is Rochelle Miller, and I'm with Connections for Independent Living, one of the 9 independent living centers in the state of Colorado. And I am so grateful for some of our partners on here to speak about affordable housing. I would hope that I could add to that word accessibility. Accessibility means whether it is physically accessible or financially accessible. And we really represent our neighbors with disabilities in a 7-county region in northeastern Colorado. So we really try to make sure that we are always using that word accessible. Connections also monitors and administers about 200 Section 8 housing vouchers in our region. And we are really finding those people who are at a real critical stage in their homelessness or in their unhoused situations, who are on waiting lists, on our waiting lists for months and months and years sometimes at a time. And what we're also finding is we're finding a larger percentage of people who are at a real critical stage when they finally receive one of those Section 8 housing vouchers and have gone through all of the hoops to get one of them, are not having enough funds to have a deposit, have money for a deposit. So we started a program that assists with that deposit funds, but we're really struggling to find partners in that space. We're also really struggling with the amount of funding that is allowable for people who are in congregate care facilities to leave those congregate care facilities in these very dangerous times. And we have recently just had a woman who qualified, was able to leave that congregate care facility, but we couldn't find any kind of housing situation that had a roll-in shower for her. So just the strain and stress of that, and having so many people still. We currently have about 45 people on our waiting list for Section 8 housing vouchers, and we have 120 actives right now. We just would really want to know whether or not there are dedicated funds for that Section 8 housing deposit assistance that might be considered, as well as additional assistance maybe even just like edging that assistance up a little bit for those people in those critical situations where they would like to leave dangerous congregate care facilities. Thank you all so much for your work in this area.
Any comments?
Yes, thank you for your work in this area. Yes, deposit assistance for voucher holders is something that Neighbor to Neighbor provides, but only for Larimer County residents.
Okay, thank you. You know, this has been such a rich conversation, and I'm looking at the time here. I think we have, I'm going to go to the chat because there's one question that's been posed a while ago, and it's from Lisa Joyner. She is saying to lower building cost and increase the number of affordable homes, will tiny home communities and 3D printing of homes be part of the plan? Any comment on that?
Sorry, I'm going to just comment on that. My tiny home bill is actually up on Tuesday in committee. And actually, what it's not legal to do right now is live full-time in a tiny home that's sitting on a temporary foundation. Well, my bill is going to try and close that gap that we have, because we believe that affordable homes or tiny homes are part of the affordable housing solution. So that's one of the bills that was brought to me by our county that I'm carrying, because we want to make sure we close that gap.
And I just want to jump in and say, you know, we need to look at everything. Innovation in this space is critical. Construction really hasn't changed for 50 years or such. We're doing things with a hammer. And if we can learn to do them with a computer, maybe that will give us some new ideas and help us along the way. So innovation is desired. And I think everybody is open to ideas.
Great, thank you. I want to leave time. I apologize yet again. We're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions, but maybe as you all give your closing remarks, you can also let our attendees know how they can get their questions, answers, how to contact you. And I'd like to ask Sue, Kristen, and Kelly just to give some brief closing remarks. Sue?
Well, thank you so much for engaging in this conversation. An hour goes like that, right? And there's so much more to talk about. So I just really appreciate everybody's interest. Housing is so personal. It affects each of us and all the people we care about so deeply. And I think that's why this is a conversation that people are willing to engage in over and over. And that's what it's going to take for us to really collectively reach our goals and provide various options that people want. Housing one size fits all is not a housing solution whatsoever. Home ownership isn't for everyone, right? There's a lot of valid reasons why people do want to rent. So somebody said it, I forget who, we need it all. And I just appreciate you guys being interested in this topic, and hopefully together, maybe we can get it all.
Thank you. Kristen?
I would second that. I think that sometimes the statistics can be very overwhelming, and I think it can be even more difficult to hear that there's not one solution, that it's so many solutions. But what gives me a lot of hope is the people that are sitting here, is the alignment of federal, state, and local policy, is the belief that I think is starting to catch, that we have created this and we can create something new. It will take time, it will take investment, it will take great minds, it will take advocates, it will take everyone standing up and saying, I want options. I want options for my kids. I want options for my grandkids. I want to be able to move out of my bigger home because I have a teen and tween down the hall, and I want to be able to downsize. I want to be able to rent when I don't want to own. You know, I think there is great alignment and understanding that home is key. Home is key to community. It is key to thriving people and to a nation where people have opportunity. So I just, I thank you for your investment. And if you want to check out a 3D printed habitat home, you can Google that. There is actually one that's been done, and it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thanks everybody for giving part of your Saturday. Thank you to our elected officials for wrapping your brains around this all the time. We just have some equity issues, and at least now they're brought to light. We have 5% affordable housing in Fort Collins and 16% poverty. So it is time to prioritize affordable home options across the spectrum for people to exit homelessness, to rent, to pursue wealth through home ownership. So thank you for being mindful of all the solutions and fitting in and being part of the solution in our own kind of neighborly ways. So thank you.
Thank you. And let's have some closing remarks from our legislators. Senator Ginal.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you to Sue, to Kelly, to Kristen. Awesome presentations. Learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone else here did as well. And I look forward to working with you. You know how to get hold of me. But thank you also to everyone who attended, and I hope it was extremely helpful for all of you as well. Thanks again. This was a very, very good town forum. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Representative Boesenecker.
Yes, thank you, Beth and Vicki, for moderating. And I just want to express my gratitude, not only for the presentations our panelists gave, but the work that they're going to do later today and tomorrow and next week. And just, you know, it's nonstop for these folks. And I rely on them, as I know my colleagues do, to help find solutions for folks in our community. And so I'm just grateful for the information and the chance to share their good work with our community. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I know our contact information is in the chat, and certainly want to remain a conversation partner on these important issues, not just in our community, but across the state. So thank you for being here today, and certainly appreciate all the great questions as well.
Thank you. Representative Young.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for all the work you are doing, and for the times you've been able to help Weld County also. We appreciate that. I'm glad that Rochelle brought up the issue of accessibility in the disability community, an important part of the conversation. And obviously, this is a conversation we are all going to have to continue the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Kipp.
Yeah, thank you to Vicki and Beth, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists, Sue and Kelly and Kristen. Really just so appreciate you guys being involved in the space. It's such an important issue. Wanted to tell you all, next month, our issue forum is on the subject of behavioral health. And we have a couple of great panelists for that session as well. But thank you all for today. Appreciate you.
Thank you all. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you for our local legislators putting together a very informative forum. I'm wishing you all a great Saturday. Enjoy this beautiful day. And thanks for participating.